Good evening, everybody. It's Monday, February 15th, 2021. My name is Mike Langford. Welcome back to another episode of DearBands Live, podcast that explores the paths and stories of career-minded artists and music industry professionals. My guest tonight, Canadian-born, starting his career in Toronto at Sony Music, eventually relocating to Los Angeles in 2003. My TV's going, 1 second. Always something. My guest tonight, Canadian-born, starting his career in Toronto at Sony Music, eventually relocating in Los Angeles 2003. Producer, engineer, and mixer who's worked with some of the top names in music, such as Shinedown, Avril Lavigne, and Nickelback. Please welcome Chris Baseford. Chris, how's it going?
Just enjoying a little mountain life, a little skiing in Switzerland. Having a good time.
I was about to say, you look like you're pretty relaxed there.
Yeah, living the dream.
I see you seem like you're stopped there for a bit. Hopefully it's moving soon. It's one of those pesky snowboarders.
I had them stop the chairlift while the podcast was rolling, so hope everybody else doesn't mind.
For anyone who's just listening, Chris is straight from the chairlift in the mountains. It looks like a combination of warm and cold there. You got sweatshirt on, you got toque on though. It's sunny though.
Beautiful.
Beautiful day. How you doing, Chris?
Hanging in there. How you doing, Mike?
Doing good. What's going on these days?
Man, just trying to get by like everybody else and stay busy and stay sane. And I'm actually up in Canada currently. Came up here in a couple months ago, just tried to get the kids close to some family and some normality. And so we're just kind of trying to make the best of the situation we're all in, trying to keep busy.
So you've been living in LA?
Yeah, I've been in LA. This will be 18 years now.
And then you popped up here because of the health situation, or?
Yeah, I mean, we were just locked down. My wife was working from home. I was, the kids' school or preschool and daycares were closed. They were at home all day. So we're just sitting here by ourselves. Like, let's go up to Canada where things are just a little less, crazy, and get the kids, some interaction with other human beings instead of grumpy old dad.
Well, I have to ask if we're chatting about some of the health stuff.
Yeah.
You being in LA, because I know LA was a hot spot early on, and did that affect the studios? Because you in studios, or like, what was kind of how was your work disrupted?
Well, I can kind of only speak for myself and my circle, let's say, because I know, not to get kind of too hot button on anything. There's definitely kind of a divide as to people's whole take on this thing. I'd say the majority of the people that I work with were taking everything very seriously and kind of shut down per whatever the regulations were. So LA was pretty locked down for a while, and kind of still is, obviously. I have a studio at my house, so I was able to kind of keep going. But what really started kind of impacting things was when I all of a sudden had, a baby daughter and my 3-year-old boy, who are now, I'm now like full-time dad. So that I think has impacted more people's work than, let's say, the studio's closed, we can't go to the studio. I heard a lot of people kind of the same thing, being like, my kids are home, schools are closed, so it's hard to get work done, number one, any work. And then the type of work that we do, where it's creative, where you might bang your head against the wall for 5 hours, and then on the 6th hour you start rolling, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, Daddy, we need this, we need that. It's like, oh shit, I've been waiting all day to get in this creative mode. And then you get kind of pulled away. So I've commiserated with some of my colleagues, it seems to be that that was the biggest impact, was just all of a sudden now having all these other things that, we kind of relied on, whether it be, schools or daycare, or, I had some friends that had, their kids had nannies, and now they're not comfortable having, the nanny in the house because of the whole COVID situation. So yeah, it's just been weird. But yeah, I know a lot of people who just basically were, at least short term, started to say, like, let's just shut down. Let's just kind of take a breather. We're going to get through this. And then when it started dragging on, then it was like, okay, how do we keep working? And luckily, I've had a couple projects. There's a band actually here in Canada called Petrick, from Winnipeg that, we've continued to do work. I've done a bunch of mixing, while this has been going on, where I'll just, I'll use session wire and, stream mixes to clients and that type of thing. So we figured out remote ways of doing things. And, there's been just workarounds that we've all kind of had to accept and make a little bit of compromise. But, I know a lot of other industries have been hit really hard, and ultimately for studio guys like me, we are still kind of able to work. Like the live stuff just breaks my heart. Obviously I know a lot of the crews, all the bands that I work with, obviously, that's kind of where they make their money these days. So, that's been heartbreaking.
Yeah. Live is just, what were you supposed to do? And you're trying to get stuff back for the summer, and it still doesn't look safe. I don't want to go too far down there, because you started seeing some of these festivals getting announced again, and just as fast as they were getting announced, other ones were starting to cancel again. So it might be a rough summer that way. You mentioned Session Wire. You mentioned like doing some work online. Mm-hmm. Have you been doing that enough where it kind of feels normal, or does it still feel like a Band-Aid? Or
it's getting a lot better. And from this workflow, if I can try to find a silver lining in this whole shitstorm that we've all been going through, is I feel like there have been some technological advances that this has basically forced the issue on. So Session Wire, I've been using Session Wire for the beginning. For the people who don't know Session Wire is basically, how a lot of people kind of describe it, is like, it's like kind of like a Zoom or a Skype, but for music production. So there's some stuff built into it that lets you, it's more appropriate for, streaming mixes or doing overdubs or that type of thing. At first, when this first became like, okay, we're going to have to work like this for a while, and we're going to have to figure this out, there was a lot of like, piecemeal patchwork. I'm going to use the audio from this app, and I'm going to use the video from this app, and I'm going to use the remote desktop from this app, and pray to God that the person on the other end has more than dial-up internet, and like the computer doesn't melt. But as things have gone on, I mean, Session Wire is a perfect example. Like Session Wire was a year ago to where it is now is night and day. And I know some of the other software solutions, same thing. Like everybody's pushed this stuff forward to where it's becoming less of a Band-Aid, and it's becoming more of like, this is how we're going to have to do things. And even once we kind of go back to being able to do things live, the technology that we got during this is still going to be there. So I think it's going to open up some opportunities that weren't there before, which is nice.
No, I'd agree with open up the opportunities. I'm of the thought this could have happened 10 years ago. This could have happened 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And just imagine if it happened 10 years ago. We talk about the advances in some of the tech, because even, it's simple for us. Once we realized we'd be doing a lot more like video stuff, because my wife's been working from home since March as well.
Yep.
And it's like, it was a simple call to our internet provider to just max out our upload and download speed, and we've been good. But like 10 years ago, no, this wouldn't have cut it at all. Like we were missing so many things. At least we can still see each other. And yeah, there's some ways to work around this, but there's been a lot of apps where, like even StreamYard, which we use for this, it's like the last year they've really upped it a lot for just little minor tweaks, and it gets better every few months. So
yeah, there's been a couple, some of the screen control where I can control somebody else's rig. So it's like, I've had a couple clients that, have had very, very like just really streamlined recording rigs just for more like sketch pads, where I'll be like, okay, I'm going to buy a laptop. I'm going to buy an interface. I have it all shipped to my house. I configure it. I get accounts set up on everything. I have software installed. I send it to them. They plug everything in, and that's all they have to do, because then I can go and control the desktop and literally run Pro Tools from my house. But the mouse on their system is rolling, and I've even had some systems where I've had remote controlled preamps so I can adjust levels for recording vocals. So I'll just plug the mic in and they sing, and I'll still get a level. It's basically like you're in the control room, but I'm on the other side of the continent.
You're just removing any what's it called? Roadblocks, any excuses. Send me the computer. I'll set it up. I'll send it to you.
Totally. Cause I've tried it with people I'm like, okay, so go turn on your computer. And they're like, okay, so what? And now that being said, the new MacBook Pros, you open that thing up for the first time. You're like, where the fuck's the power button? But I've had some people where, even just being like, okay, I need you to log on to Team, or I need you to launch TeamViewer and give me the code. And like, that takes 30 minutes because they don't know what to do. So I've had to go extreme with doing the whole system configuration. All you have to do is turn the computer on, and that's it.
It sounds like path of least resistance. Send me the computer. I'll ship it to you. We can do this.
Yeah. Buying microphones, not to go too much into promotion land, but another company that I love what they're doing is Townsend Labs, and they make a modeling microphone called the Sphere. The cool thing about the Sphere is, and I've sent these to a bunch of clients that I've had to do vocal overdubs, is literally you just set it up, we set the gain, and I can pick the sound after the fact. I can pick the mic model. I can adjust the proximity effect. If they're a little too far off, I can crank the proximity effect. If they're a little too far close, I can turn it.
That's crazy.
There's so much stuff. There's so much cool stuff that that we've really been able to utilize that makes this less of a compromise, at least from the end product. I love being in the room with people. I'm really, really craving the day where I can actually just sit in a studio with a band, and be in that moment and not have screens and headphones and earbuds and microphones and all that stuff that we're talking through. But there is ways to do it now where when the final product comes out, it's not like in 2021 or 2022 a bunch of albums are going to be coming out and we're going to look back and be like, yeah, those were all done during COVID.
We sounds like
we can tell, it's not that at all. We're able to do as good of a quality product as we've always done, with some minor inconveniences or compromises, I guess, from the workflow standpoint. So
just kind of branching off from that, just the energy of the studio and having everyone there. You mentioned also having your studio home.
Yep. And
bit of a blessing and a curse having a studio at home, because there are distractions. There are other things that are there. And you mentioned before, it's just like with the family there, and it's like, it's been difficult. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of a way to word this, the idea of having a space outside the home, or would you still keep it inside the home?
So my studio in LA is, it's in a separate structure that's in the backyard.
Oh, okay. So there's an air gap.
There's a big air gap, which is, well, not a big air gap, but there's an air gap. That I will say, and even if it's 10 yards, is, for me, is a huge difference. Just being in a separate structure, even if it's on the property or in the backyard or in the, whatever, that makes a huge difference. Knowing that I'm not going to be disturbing anybody with noise, or, it's a lot easier for my, 3.5-year-old son to come and knock on the door if I'm in the house.
Yeah.
Whereas if he's got to go outside and get it down the steps and whatever, and that happens too, but it's a lot more of a process. So, that for me was a big change. And that was a huge goal of mine for a long time, was to have my own studio that wasn't in the house. But I will say, just, and it's something that, we're, me and my wife were just literally discussing, like, having a studio at the house is a blessing and a curse. But if you can be disciplined about it and the family can be disciplined about it, being able to, go in for dinner and then go back out.
Yes.
Or with my kids, being able to go in and, tuck my kids in and then go out. And those are just, half hour, 15 minutes, whatever. But if you've got even a 10-minute commute, you're not going to do, a lot of people aren't going to do it.
No. If you feel like staying home, you're going to stay home. But at the same time too, if you feel like staying at work, you'll just stay at work.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you're in the studio and it's kind of like, and you're on even if you're not like on a big roll, or if you're doing something that's not like, oh, I got to keep hammering this out, going inside to tuck your kid in for, 10 minutes or, read a nighttime story when the studio's in the backyard is, I don't even, there's no second thought. But if I was in a, commercial space somewhere, or, even, another house that's, let's say, 10 minutes away, you start kind of thinking, as much as your intentions would be like, yeah, I want to go home and tuck my kid in every night. It's like, okay, well, do you want to, that's going to turn into like an hour.
Yeah.
And then you got to get back in the groove. And there's that whole dynamic that I'm maybe a little bit too hypersensitive to. When I get in a groove, it's like, I don't want to stop. And when I'm not in a groove, it's hard. It's a challenge to sometimes get in it.
Well, definitely blessing and curse. One of the things I like about having the room at home, it's like when I stand up at work, I'm home. When I sit down, I'm at work. So it's a lot easier that way. And again, with dinners and, even the convenience of like doing laundry or something like that, it's nice to be able to do some of those small things, but I wouldn't trade it. Talking about the energy, working with bands or artists, have you had experience during this time or heard of people that have been working with artists that have had a really hard time trying to record a vocal at home or guitar parts at home or just work at home?
Yeah, lots. Even just the technical aspect of it. I know so many people now even at the very least can fire up GarageBand or whatever. But especially when it's like when the summer came around and concerts were shut down.
Done, yeah.
That was the moment. Like, I feel like everybody took not a little break, but people were kind of like, okay, cool. We'll take, March till April or May, and we'll just kind of chill, lay low and kind of chill out a little bit. And then when it was like, okay, concerts are canceled, now everybody's like, oh shit, we got to fill our time. We got to start doing something. We got to be productive. Then I started getting the calls from people being like, hey, we want to start writing. We want to start doing this. How do we do it? And again, I had kind of been experimenting with different workflows, and I would say maybe half started with good intentions and then just got like, they're like, fuck this, because they got either bogged down with just the technology, or the virtual window just didn't work for them where they needed, and I get that. I get it 100%. And there's been a bunch of things that I've tried to kind of bridge that gap, whether it be like, okay, like right now, Mike, you're on my computer screen and your head is maybe like 1.5 inches high. Let's get a big screen and let's put the Zoom window or the session wire window on a 70-inch TV. And so that way, does that make it feel a little more real? And sometimes that works, right? So there's different things that we've tried, but yeah, I would say probably like maybe half of the people that, my clients or new artists that I want to, not necessarily new artists, but artists that were new to working with me that were like, okay, let's start working, let's start doing something. Half were kind of too bogged down or didn't like this thing enough to really push forward. I think now that's dragged on, I'm starting to see some of that circle back, being like, okay, well, let's reluctantly figure it out. And I've figured out the workflow and some of these tricks to hopefully make that a little bit more comfortable for them and facilitate that. But I know a lot of people who have had issues. Just it's more technically. So the trick has been trying to make it as simple as possible for them.
Do you on the same thread? Do you think this is going to create and widen a gap for a lot of artists and bands that can work remotely? And do you think they'd be more efficient, or do you think this is exposing a gap with their technical ability?
I think it's probably both. I do know a few people who were like, did not, like I said, there were a few clients that I bought rigs for and built them. They had nothing before then and had no intentions of ever having their own rig, right? They wrote on an acoustic guitar and a piano, and then they went to the studio and they hired guys like me or other engineers, and that's what they would do. And I've watched a few of them go from like literally, having once a week and, an hour phone call with them, trying to like talk them through getting set up, to them like producing their own demos for the first time in their careers and being like, holy shit, did you do this by yourself? And not that it's like super crazy, but like they went from 0 to 30 in a couple months, whereas before then had no intentions of ever doing it. So for some people, it's been great, and it's definitely helped kind of bridge that gap, for lack of a better term. For other people, I think that it's definitely kind of I think it's maybe exposed, like you said, a little bit, not want to say a weakness, but it's kind of exposed that they're like, holy shit, I can't create unless I've got the people in the studio, in the space, and, other people in the room. Like I know some writers who are like pure collaborators, and writing on their own has been tough. And then doing it on Zoom doesn't quite work for them. So I think it's kind of personal, depending on kind of what their situation is.
So I'm going to bring a comment from Mr. Jeremy Isbell on here. It says, I can't tell you the money I've spent in the last year on upgrading equipment to work remotely.
I've heard that.
That's been so many people. And it's like, I don't know, not to dig in with, again, this is DearBands, not to dig in with bands and artists, but it's just like the money I see spent on certain things. And then it's like, oh, but you should buy an interface so you can record at home. Oh, I can't afford that. You should get better internet. Oh, I can't afford that.
I had a musician friend the other day send me a text, and I'm a gear nut, like not crazy where it's like I need all the best stuff. I'm pretty objective about it, but I like stuff.
According to the internet, you like gear and you
like
software.
I like it all. I like skis. I like guitars. I like cars. I like whatever it is. Golf clubs. I just like gear. And so I'm kind of like the resource for a lot of my friends and clients who are whatever. And I had a musician friend call me the other day and be like, hey, I'm looking into cameras for my calls. And he's like, had you know anybody who has this one? And he sends me a link, and it's like a $1,400 like remote control. Like, I'm like, you're going to spend $1,400 on a fucking camera webcam for basically what we're doing right now? And again, hey, I'm all for if you can figure out that one piece that's going to make this tolerable versus I don't want to do it. And if that's going to be having like a great camera, then I'll go, by all means, go for it. But I guarantee you that same person, if I was like, hey, you got to buy this $1,500 mic, he'd be like, I don't know. Like, yeah, totally. Right. You're like, okay, we're overdubbing vocals. Just make sure your Zoom looks good, but don't worry about your vocal sound. Like,
with the webcam stuff, because I've been streaming for the last few years, and these Logitech C920 cameras were like $70 for the longest time. And then when people need to start streaming because of supply and demand, all of a sudden they were $200, because I was telling everyone, just go on Amazon, grab a C920 and it'll be good. And they're like, where's the one you were talking about for $70? And like, it's right here. Never mind. And then, so like those flew off the shelves. USB mixers flew off the shelves.
Yep.
SM7s flew off the shelf. Like, so much gear just was gone. And part of me was just like, I hate to say it, but you should have had this stuff a while ago. Like, we needed this, but anyways, it is what it is or it was what it was at that point, when you just kind of, bite the bullet, spend the $150 on a webcam and stuff like that you trust. But
yeah, but even like the software, subscriptions, I've been hearing that from some people as well. Then be like, holy shit, like I'm getting like $9.99 to death every month from, I've got my this and my that, and like all the, the file sharing, the Dropbox, the Zoom Pro account, so I can have a bunch of people on it to say, like, just lots of subscriptions. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens when this is kind of all settles down. Like, are people just going to cancel everything, or are they going to be like embrace some of that stuff and keep it going? I mean, it's tough to say, but it's it's a weird time.
Yeah. What stays? I've been on this. We won't go on this forever, but I've been on the side, like, these skills that we're picking up right now, like, keep it going. When we get live concerts and touring back, and we can get back into the studio, like, keep a lot of this going. Keep a lot of artists talked to too. They've had like weekly meetings, and like they feel like they've talked about the band or their business more than usual, because like usually they would just get together and do music, but now they're talking about the business side of it as well. It's like, keep all these habits going.
Yeah.
So I do think the skill sets we have right now, also being able to work online, it makes the world really small when you're comfortable. Other cities, other countries, other time zones, like the possibilities. Like, I can imagine someone who's 17 right now that has their own production chops and, laptop producer or whatever. They're doing good work, and they're understanding this. It's like, they're not going to know any different going forward. They're not going to be thinking like, I wish we could tour again, because they weren't thinking that to begin with. So like, I'm curious in 10 years, some of the powerhouses coming out of this.
Agreed. And not only the powerhouses, but what is the delivery mechanism going to be? I mean, obviously I've been seeing bands doing, virtual concerts and, obviously a lot of, Zoom call or Zoom like sessions and stuff like that. But I feel like there's probably something that we haven't even thought about yet in terms of just a delivery mechanism for whether it be, concerts or entertainment, and just, I don't even know what it is yet. I just feel like this is forcing people to, because, as much as virtual concerts are great, and I've tuned into a few of them and they've been really great and it's awesome, for now, it's not the same.
Very different.
Very different. But I feel like instead of trying to make it the same, if there's I feel like people are starting to be like, okay, well, if we can't have a live concert, and we're, instead of trying to give people that same experience on their, TV screen or their computer screen and some headphones, well, why not figure out a way to give them a similar type of, it's a show, it's a live performance, but use the technology that you wouldn't have control over if they were in the crowd at your show. For instance, you're sitting in the seat, you're in a fixed position, you're hearing the sound that you're hearing based off where you are in the room and based off the way the guys mixed it. You're seeing the show based on, like, there's all these things. It's like, okay, well, if it's a computer screen and headphones, well, you've just opened up some possibilities. So what could you do to make that even more intriguing of an experience? And I don't know what they are, and who knows what that's going to look like. But I feel like, there's probably something going to come out of this that's going to be like, oh yeah, we didn't do that before, and this is why it happened. But it's not taking the place of live concerts. It's instead, it's in addition to. You know what I mean? Well, so we'll see what happens.
Can we explore this for a little bit? Because sure. I think this is, I think there's some points to be made here and some points to be explored here. My lovely wife and I, we watch, one of my favorite bands is called The Hives, and they did the world's first World Wide Web world tour, which is a very Hives name for something.
Totally.
And the thing is, the way that they did their show, because I was curious how they were going to do it. You log in, they did cities around the world. So the one we were watching was the New York one. So they got sounds of New York to kind of play before it was going. Mm-hmm. But on the side is, so I can see in the frame, on the side is the chat. So you got people, Texas is here, and Mexico's here, and Sweden's here. So you got people that are chiming in that are able to have their own party in the chat. Yep. And then we're able to watch the concert. The way they shot it was one camera moving around like an hour-long video, like music video. And you saw real time, like people getting up between songs and pouring water on themselves, because it's got to be hot where they are with all the lights. And then they were taking calls on WhatsApp. And then they were answering, it was interactive. And I think that's the thing that musicians have been missing
Yeah.
during this whole thing. It's like, yes, people want to go to a show and you deliver the performance and they applaud, and like there's that exchange of energy. But I think like people fronting bands right now, especially an artist, the idea where they can interact directly with their fans in real time,
Yeah.
that's the thing. You don't necessarily get that at a live concert. You get the mob interacting, you
Yep.
get the crowd interacting,
Yep.
but you don't have someone actually pick up the phone and say, "Where are you calling from?" "I'm from San Diego." "What song do you want to hear?" "I want to hear this." "Well, it's not in the set, so we're not going to play it, but we're going to play this instead." Like, it's just have fun with it. And
Totally.
it's like that. Yeah. It's like, even with this Dear Bands Live, it's like, yeah, we have a chat going. There's people that are hanging out in the chat. That's the one thing where it's like, we won't get that live. But I'm starting to wonder, do people miss the live show because it's loud, because they're free to do some stuff that's like they can let loose a little bit?
Yep.
But that was the way that they could see the band. But I don't know. One of the upsides too, I'm going to rant for a second here. One of the upsides too, it's like, if you got to go to the bathroom, no lineup. If you want to grab another drink, if you're Toronto, it's not like $17.
Yeah.
It's like, there's all these little things that can make it more of an enjoyable experience in some ways as well.
Yeah. Well,
sorry,
it's interesting because I'm a big sports fan, and as much as I love going to a hockey game, you know what? I'm going to back up. Hockey is one of those sports where I will always go live.
Tickets there.
Let's back up. Let's say, and this might sound a little boring and old man, but I'm an avid golfer, and in LA they've got a pretty substantial golf tournament every year on the PGA, and Tiger Woods and all the big players go, and I love going. But going to watch golf live, you're not going to watch golf. You're going to try to get within 10 feet of Tiger Woods for 30 seconds and watch him walk by in real life. Like, you're people watching. It has nothing to do with the sport. If I really want to watch golf, I'll go home and sit on my couch, because there's 18 holes on the golf course, and each hole is either 120 to 600 yards long, and they've got 40 cameras out. And in the matter of a split second, they can go from the guy's second shot on hole 1 to the guy's third shot on hole 15, and then cut back for the guy's putt on hole 1. Like,
Yeah.
you can't. There's no way to replicate that experience. There's no way to replicate that experience at the golf course watching a golf tournament. And I think that's one of the reasons. Like, you talk about various production. Ways of producing certain forms of entertainment, and I look at like the way that they produce golf on TV. I'm like, man, they said, forget about trying to make this like you're at the golf course. Forget that. Who cares? Let's show them what it looks like from the Goodyear blimp. Like, nobody on the golf course ever sees that, but they've got a Goodyear blimp rolling around showing you the entire course. Like, they said, forget about that. So I feel like, yeah, there is something awesome about smelling the fresh cut grass and literally like being able to put out your hand and maybe Tiger Woods gives you a high five. Like, there's something really cool about that. But if you're there to watch golf, and then it's better to stay at home and watch it on TV. And I'm not saying that about live concerts, because I agree with you 100%. Why I go to a live people always ask me, they're like, "Oh, you must love going to concerts." And I love going to concerts, but I don't like going to concerts to listen to music, because I'm used to hearing music in a studio all day long where it sounds pristine and perfect in a controlled environment without like a bunch of sweaty dudes like around me, right? Well, if I'm working with a band, there's usually a bunch of sweaty dudes around me, but you know what I mean? Yeah, I'd rather listen to music in my studio.
It's funny. I was just, one of the things too, is like, imagine you've been tuning vocals all day.
Yeah.
And then you go see a band, and then someone's like, "Oh, the singer was awesome." You're like, "Yeah."
No, that's what it is. It's like, I couldn't hear the singer. Was he singing? I didn't know. Did they had the vocal turned up? But that's a perfect example of something. And I think somebody tried to do this once. Like, how cool would it be and maybe this is just cool to me because I'm a nerd when it comes to audio production, but how cool would it be if I'm streaming a band's concert? Like, if I'm, like Jimmy Eat World has been doing albums top to bottom streaming, right? But and they sound great. But how cool would it be if at some point in time during the concert, I was like, man, I'd really like to hear the snare drum a little louder.
If you could mix the show from where you are,
just fucking crank up the snare drum a little bit. Like not full mix, but like how cool would it be to be like, man, I really love, I know this song and there's a really cool guitar part coming up. And I can't tell you how many times I've been to live concerts. I'm not trying to rag on live sound guys. They got a way tougher job than I have. But there's been so many times where I know like an awesome part in the song's about to come up. And all of a sudden, yeah, exactly, totally. Some people have asked me like, "Oh, have you ever done live sound?" I'm like, well, "Fuck no fucking way!" Like I can't. I would never try it in
just
a million
for
years.
Anyone just listening, Jeremy said, "I love the chaos of live front of house because I'm crazy."
Yeah, you got to be a little nutty. You got to be a little nutty. But like, there's been a lot of times where like I know there's a cool part coming up, and it's like it's buried. I can't even fucking hear it because like, it just comes and goes so quickly, and because of the chaos. The sound guy might be making sure the vocal's not feeding back, and meanwhile, I missed the guitar part I've been waiting to hear for the entire show.
Well, that's the next part. There's a couple of things from the chat I want to get back to in a second here, but that's the next part. You're talking about virtual concerts and whether you meant this or not. The last year, I've been thinking a lot about VR concerts. Mm-hmm. The idea, and then I started looking into it, and it's like Facebook has Oculus. They keep releasing these new headsets. Tidal, the platform for listening to music, they've been going heavy into EDM electronic music to hold these virtual concerts, and they've been holding VR concerts. And when you start talking about some of these things, because we start even to talk about sports, the idea, if you're at, because we're Toronto, we're at a Leafs game, and the idea where you could pay $7 or $20 or whatever and sit wherever you want in the upper bowl. You could pay $30 and sit wherever you want in the lower bowl. $50, you can sit right behind the bench and hear what the players are saying and stuff. The idea of having those different experiences and actually be able to move your head around and immerse yourself in it, because it is getting better.
Yeah.
But the idea that with those virtual concerts, how much would you pay to get 8 channels or 16 channels so you're watching the concert from whatever position you want? You're like, hey, I wish the snare drum was a little bit louder. You could, press something, it give you the faders. You could move it up. If you screw up your mix, you could go back to front house, just hit default and put it back to where it is. Like, just imagine that as an immersive experience, though. Imagine your favorite band and you can mix them.
Yeah, it would be again, it might be a small niche market, but I would dig that. And
it's just code.
It's just code. Like, why not? Right. And here to be devil's advocate on this whole thing. And this is a very important thing. And I've been hearing, this from, again, I'm a sports nerd too. So it's like, I've been hearing this in interviews from, either golfers or hockey players and, what's it like playing with no fans? The other thing, like kind of the intangible thing that even if we as spectators get the ultimate experience virtually, the fact that there aren't any fans at the venue ultimately impacts what's happening from a performance standpoint. And I don't know if, like, I can't imagine. I mean, when we're talking about bands, I cannot imagine there's a scenario where a band would prefer to play to, in a warehouse with 10 cameras, but knowing that 50,000 or 100,000 people are watching them versus playing in a club with no cameras, but it's packed full with 1,000 people. I can't imagine the first scenario being preferable. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
But the other scenario gives 100,000 people or infinite amounts of people the access. So like, I feel like, post COVID, I think, talking about how can we take some of this stuff and make it, improve things going forward. There's no reason why that club with 1,000 people packed and the band feeling that and ultimately putting on a better show cannot also have 10 cameras being streamed and let me mix and let somebody with VR move around amongst the crowd or however that's going to work. I don't know. But like, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, I think it can be both.
It can definitely be both. And again, to go back earlier, it's just like some of the technology that we've got the last year. Yeah. It's just like still just run with it. Cause like it's going to get better. I do believe we will get our concerts and festivals and big tours.
I sure hope so.
It's going to. I can't imagine it not.
Me too.
Yeah. So it's just a matter. It's not a matter of if. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
Just want to pull a couple things from the chat here.
Sorry, guys. I'm not looking at the chat. Let me.
It's all good.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
Jeff says it makes me happy. Had him on a couple of weeks ago.
Thanks, buddy.
And to kind of wrap up this topic, Kim chimed in, said online shows have been able to reach audiences that may not have considered pre-virus, especially internationally. Creativity can reign in this area. Just a thought. Absolutely. And I would tie that into as well. We talk about it often. It's like in the 80s and 90s, the music, well, even the 70s, the music you had access to was the music within your friend circle. If you were
older brother,
if you're into Cannibal Corpse, it was hard to ask someone down the hall, like, hey, you know that Taylor Swift record, just to kind of give it a try.
Totally.
We can hop onto Spotify or whatever platform you want to use and listen to whatever you want. And the idea where like, you know, and actually this kind of ties in because there's people that say, you know, Nickelback sucks. And Nickelback was like, hey, come see us live. They can put a show on. Yeah. Anyone that wants to come and see us, come and see the show. So the idea where you can have a taste of so much. And even a few years ago, one of my favorite Facebook accounts that were streaming their shows was Cypress Hill, because they had a show on like every night for a while, and I'd be scrolling, and all of a sudden, oh, Cypress Hill's got a show, and you click on it, and it was the production value was awesome, and it sounded awesome. Yeah, and I'm just like, this is kind of the future. They were a little bit ahead of the time. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's just we have access to stuff right now, and I think as far as growing a fan base, like. It's not to say it's never been easier, but like you've never had better tools to try to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, for better or worse, you know, I mean, I have, you know, I've got some projects, some like software projects in the works that I want to make just so I have tools to use. But ultimately the tools get better when there's some sort of, you know, capital gain for the person doing
some monetary urgency.
Totally. Yeah. So, you know, yeah, I'm doing some guitar amp simulator plugins that are awesome. And I want to share those with as many people as possible. But ultimately, like, I'm kind of doing them so that way I have access to them for my own stuff. And if everybody else likes them, great. But there's a lot of other stuff that will not see the light of day unless there's a really mass demand for it. And this has created a mass demand for a lot of this technology that otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten. It would have been guys who just want it for themselves and are willing to kind of like, you know, bite the bullet for it. So. Yeah,
no, there have been some upsides. Definitely been some downsides, but there's been some upsides on the tech side. We were almost 45 minutes in. We haven't even scratched the surface of what I want to chat with you about. How did you get started? How far back do you want to go? Like, was there?
We can go all the way back.
Well, was there something in particular? You're just like how did you start getting into studios? Are you recording yourself, bands, friends?
So there was. It's interesting. You know, I've asked this to a lot of people or have heard interviews, and it's interesting kind of hearing some people be like, I just kind of, you know, whatever. It's like there was a very distinct moment in my life where I'm like, that's what I want to do. And I mean, you know, when I was in, you know, elementary school, I played guitar and, you know, I would put together bands and, you know, I was always the guy who just liked, you know, trying to make things sound good. Like, you know, I'd sit there and, you know, play a E chord and palm mute and tweak the amp for like 30 minutes before we even started playing a song. So, I mean, I was already kind of into sounds early. But I was probably, I think it was like maybe 14 or 15. No, it's probably 14. And I had a band that we'd, you know, been playing together for a while, and we were kind of serious, as serious as you can be as a 14-year-old kid playing.
Pretty
in a band.
Serious.
But yeah, we were serious. Like we, you know, we thought it was pretty serious. And we would save up some money. We all had kind of like part-time jobs, and we would, you know, once maybe every like 3 or 4 months, we'd go and rent like a 4-track cassette recorder and 4 mics and just make the worst sounding shit you've ever heard. And then it started kind of getting slowly better. But I remember one summer, a good friend of mine, his older brother, who was probably maybe like, we all have, like, my brother's 3 years older than me. So I did get influenced by my brother's music a little bit. Like, he'd have stuff laying around. I'd go listen to it. Some of it I liked, some of it I didn't. But my buddy's older brother, he was like, I think like probably like 7 or 8 years older than us. So it was a little bit different than like my brother, who was 3 years older than me. And it was in summer break, and we were at my buddy's house, and we were just like going through his older brother's like rock movies and like documentaries and concert and, VHS tapes. Right. And I was a Metallica fan, and we saw a movie, and it was Metallica's Year and a Half in the Life of, which is basically them documenting the making of the Black Album. And I'm like, oh, cool, let's watch this, because we'd probably watched all the other ones already. And I put it in, and it was like them in the studio. Within like maybe 15 minutes, like the 5 other dudes were like, fuck this is boring. And I was just glued. And I watched that movie, and I probably that summer must have watched that movie like, I don't know, probably 15 times, 20 times over and over and over again. It's basically them making the Black Album, which at the time like was one of my favorite albums. And like I watched that, and I was like, fuck, there are people who actually do that for a living. And it was also interesting because I had kind of subconsciously made the connection between the sonics of different albums. So one of my favorite bands was, and still is, Motley Crue. And I love Dr. Feelgood. That album, to me, and I didn't know why, even when I was young, I didn't know why I liked, aside from it, I liked Motley Crue, but like for whatever reason, that album just sounded so much better than everything else. And then when I got hooked on the Black Album, I'm like, man, this kind of sounds like it had a similar, and it was subconscious, but like my 5 favorite albums, after I'd seen this movie and was like, oh, there's this Bob Rock guy and this Randy Staub guy, like, oh, fuck. And then like I made the connection. I was like, wow, my 5 favorite albums are like this Bob Rock and Randy Staub guys by 5 different bands. And it's like, it all kind of clicked. And I'm like, man, like those guys, with no disrespect, I'm like, those guys had more of an impact for me listening to Sonics and being subconsciously like influenced by the Sonics of an album. Those guys had such a huge thing on it. Like the Black Album, or, pick whatever, Bob Rock albums at the time, like 2 different bands produced by Bob Rock sounded more the same than the one band's 2 different albums that were done by Bob Rock and a different guy, if you know what I mean. Mm. And so like I was just, at that point, I was just like, all the blinders went on. I was like, I think I was 14 or 15. And from that point on, I'm like, I'm making records. And the goal from literally like that point on was the goal, like just get through school as fast as possible and start making records one way or another.
So growing up, supportive, indifferent, not supportive of this decision?
Parents?
Yeah.
Supportive. I mean, as supportive as you could be, like, I mean, supportive. Yeah, go for it. Both my parents loved music, played music, not as a living, but like, they were, played in the high school band. And my dad just like, a lot of my early music influence came from my dad. Like he's just, classic rock guy. My earliest music memory, and I've actually still got the record, was and it's funny, I got a 3-year-old kid now who's just exactly the same, but I had a toy guitar, and I can remember being like 2 years old and playing along to Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen on my toy guitar. I can remember it vividly. And I still have the exact record that I used to play on my Care Bears record player that I think was my older brother's. So like, even from when I was young, like there was always a lot of like listening to music in the house, and, they're very supportive with like playing guitar as a hobby and stuff like that. I mean, I always played sports as well.
So you had instruments in the house?
I did. Yeah. Nobody else did. Like nobody else played. Oh, actually, you know what? When I was a kid, my mom played piano. My mom played piano when I was like, young, but probably from like 3 years old on, there, like, it was usually, I think I got an acoustic guitar when I was maybe 10, played that thing for 2 weeks and put it under the bed, and then pulled it out again probably like 3 years later and was like, okay, I got to get an electric guitar. So
no, it seems to be a common thread, though, just having access to instruments growing up. You know, it's when you're kids, it's there, mess around on it, you know.
The biggest thing for me was more access to the music. Is less about the instruments and more about the music. Like, I always had a paper route or some sort of, like, you know, summer job cutting grass or doing something. So I would blow all of that money on albums and stereos. And I was all like, for me, it was all about like, okay, I got to get a good sounding stereo. Or I remember like my first really good sounding headphones. And that's what really kind of, that initiated I want to start playing.
That is interesting, because a lot seem to start with the instrument side of it, but what I'm getting is you latched onto the sonics.
100%.
You got buried in that, and we're just like, I'm hearing, like, is no one else hearing what I'm hearing right now?
Well, and I think about that, and I've thought about this a lot. I've analyzed it, and I've had really deep conversations with people about it. And I'm like, why Born in the USA and not Fleetwood Mac Rumors? Well, not saying Fleetwood Mac Rumors doesn't sound good, but fucking Born in the USA is like like a fucking cartoon compared to what everything else was at the time. Like that was larger than life. Like the sound of it, like even now, like I play that in my studio and I'm just like, man, it still sounds good. I mean, it's very obviously it's a sound. It's a very specific sound, but like I don't think that was you know, a coincidence that's the thing that I like got me going when I was 2 years old. You know, it wasn't James Taylor.
No, but it's interesting because like I have songs that I still will listen to because I'm like, it stood the test of time and I think it sounds great.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm of the thought too. I'm just like, records to me should be like movies where like you can bend reality a little bit. It's like, oh, it sounds, they don't sound the same live. I'm like, well, live to me is like, it's like theater, you know, it's like as far as music goes, but it's like the recording can be like a movie. It's like, yeah, cars don't naturally explode like that, but in the movies they explode like 3 times because that's way more exciting. So like when we're recording certain things, like capture the band of the artist, but make it larger than life. And there's lots of ways to do that.
Well, you're speaking my language because I have this conversation all the time with bands, especially when, you know, you're kind of vetting each other out as to, you know, maybe it's a new band that doesn't, you know, just got a deal or is indie. Or maybe it's a band that's already established and they're kind of looking for a different direction. And not to put myself in the same caliber as, you know, a guy like Jerry Bruckheimer, but I'm like, I try to make music the way Jerry Bruckheimer makes movies. So yeah, if an engine blows on a car in real life and it just kind of goes poof,
and the car stops working, you're like, okay.
And the car stops working and you get out and you walk down the street to the gas station, you know, whatever. Like if that's what happens in real life, when that happens in my real life or in my music production, I want that car to lift 50 feet off the ground and, you know, people go flying and the flames you could see for miles, like, you know, and that's how the music that I gravitated towards, even when I had no idea what music production was. Like literally that moment that I watched that Metallica movie and everything just clicked. Like it literally clicked. I became very aware of like albums just don't sound the way they sound because that's like for no reason.
It's not an accident.
It's not an accident. And then when everything kind of clicked, I was like, holy shit. Like there's a reason why. And even now that I know so many of these guys that I grew up listening to, and it's been incredible. Like I remember talking about Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood. I think I was in LA for 6 weeks and fucking Tommy Lee came by the studio and I was just like, holy fuck. Like that's fucking Tommy Lee.
That's the guy.
That's the guy. And I can vividly remember, like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking of it. I can vividly remember being like 13 and like we were playing in this band that, the same group of guys have been playing together for a couple of years, and everybody's into their different music and whatever. And I vividly remember like, and we had a good drummer. Like our drummer was maybe the best musician in the band. And I remember like going over one day and I was like band practice. And I'm like, okay, pulling the drummer aside, be like, okay, I want you to listen to something. I think you need to play more like this. And I just like, played him like 4 Motley Crue songs. And I was basically like, you need to be Tommy Lee. Like, just start fucking playing like Tommy Lee. And because he didn't listen to Motley Crue at all. But so like growing up, it was like, that was like the pinnacle. So I don't even know where I was going with this, but when I started connecting the dots of everything, it's like, and then you start taking it further back and I'm like, okay, so I love the sound of, Dr. Feelgood and the Black Album and the Cult Sonic Temple and, but I also really like the sound of this Jackal album. And I really like the sound of this Bon Jovi New Jersey album. And then I start like paying attention to this Bob Rock and Randy Staub guy made these records that I like. And I started paying attention. I'm like, wait a minute. This Bob Rock guy, who's a producer on these other 4 records that I love, he was the engineer with Bruce Fairbairn on these other 5 records that I love. And I'm like, holy fuck. Like it all like just funnels down. And then you start seeing like, Aerosmith Pump. Oh, that's that Bruce Fairbairn guy too. Oh, but who's this Mike Fraser guy? And then you're like, oh, and then you start, and I'm like, holy shit. Like there's a handful of guys. I'll say with the exception of, Mutt Lang, who then has somehow kind of, 6 degrees of separation. I'm not that far, removed from him now either, but like, not that I've met him, but I would love to. But like there's like a handful of guys that made all my favorite albums that sound the way that I always loved albums to sound and didn't know it until I started understanding it. And that just made me even more like just gung ho about wanting to do that.
It is interesting when you start looking through production credits and you start finding common threads through them.
That's exactly what it was.
Because of how certain things sound. Because I'm guilty of not really looking until something catches my ear enough, and then I look and I'm like, oh, that was Rich Costi again.
Of course.
You start going through certain things. You're like, okay, that's them again. Just out of curiosity, like, have you met Bob Rock?
I've met Bob Rock a couple times.
First time,
never worked with him, but I've met him a couple times.
Circumstances, first time you met him?
He came over to. So, speaking of common threads, and like it's crazy. I don't think about this enough. And I catch myself and this is one of those moments I'm catching myself. I sometimes catch myself not. I don't want to say not appreciating. I'm very thankful, and I have a lot of gratitude for everything, like the way that I've come up and been able to do this. But I don't reflect and appreciate enough kind of just like how this came together and the fact that it did. And so speaking of Bob Rock, and obviously you'll know Phase One because, it's a very, very famous studio in Toronto. A lot of those guys who ended up going to what, kind of became the Vancouver kind of 80s, 90s, studio scene. A lot of those guys came out of Phase One. And they were, assistants or engineers or programmers or whatever. And little did I know, my first real studio gig was at Sony Music. I'm going to connect the dot all the way back, and then I'll come back to the Bob Rock thing. Because like I said, I don't think about this enough, and it's making me like nostalgic and very like I'm filled with gratitude right now for all the people that I've been able to kind of connect with. So anyways, my very first studio gig was at Sony Music, and the head engineer at Sony Music at the time was a guy named Lenny DeRose. And the story of me kind of starting at Sony was kind of funny in itself, but long story short, Lenny gave me an opportunity to come and kind of hang out and just fly on the wall. And then that turned into, amazing stuff. I met Jeff Dalziel, and he was a huge mentor of mine, and, took me under his wing and learned just an absolute ton from him, not only about making music, but just living and being in the music business and just being that person. But Lenny DeRose was like a pretty prominent engineer at Phase One. And it's interesting because I knew who Randy Staub was. I knew who Garth Richardson was. I knew who Bill Kennedy was. I knew who Scott Humphrey was. But before working at Sony, I mean, I knew of Lenny DeRose's names on the albums, but I didn't know of his connection to Phase One. And it turns out like all of these guys were either Lenny's assistant or like worked alongside Lenny and blah, blah, blah. And then went on to like, be long engineers and, co-mixers with Bob Rock and obviously Garth Richardson and Bill Kennedy doing their records. So anyways, Lenny, a friend of Lenny's who he worked with at Phase One way back was a guy named Scott Humphrey, who went to LA, another Canadian that came up through kind of the Phase One thing. And he was a keyboard player and programmer, really heavy into digital editing way before anybody knew what the fuck it was. Maybe Jeff knew what it was, but he's probably the only other guy. But anyways, Lenny so graciously offered me up to Scott Humphrey when he needed a guy in LA and was like, "You're going to LA." And I'm like, "Okay." And I knew Scott, he'd made some records that I really loved with Rob Zombie and, Motley Crue and all that stuff. Scott was Bob's digital editor way back when. So Scott knew Bob Rock, and I can't remember the circumstance, but Bob came over to Scott's studio. Oh, I do remember the circumstance now. Bob Rock was in LA and somehow had touched base with Scott. And so he brought him over to the studio, and we were doing a project where we were doing a bunch of mix recreations where we would get multi-tracks from, famous, songs, and we would mix them for a specific software format. And Scott brought Bob in, and I think I can't remember what song I was mixing, but I was doing a recreation, and he brought him into one of the rooms the room that I was mixing in. He's like, "Oh, Chris is Bob." I'm like, "Holy shit!" And he knew like I like Bob Rock, but it was really cool because a week later I get a call from Epitaph Records, and they said, and Bob Rock I think had just done like I think maybe the second Offspring record that he had done with them, which I can't remember what album that was, but they're like, "Yeah, this Guitar Hero, have you heard of this Guitar Hero thing?" Yeah. Well, we need these mixes done. And we called Bob, who produced the album. And he said that you're doing these like mix recreations and that you can get the mixes to sound really close and everything. Can we send you 6 songs from the Offspring to do for Guitar Hero? And I'm like, holy fuck, Bob Rock just referred me a gig. I met him for 30 seconds, but it was kind of a cool thing where I was like, holy shit. So I ended up doing, Guitar Hero mixes for the Offspring because Bob Rock told Epitaph to give me a call and that I could do it. I'm like, holy shit, that's pretty cool. So yeah, sorry for the long-winded story.
No, it's all good.
That's kind of how it came to the tangled web.
Did you get a chance to chat with them, or is it more just like
not enough?
Like it was Bob, Chris, Bob.
No, but I have had a little bit more of a chance. I've spent more time with Randy because with the Nickelback stuff, we still have Randy mix some songs for us. And even when I was working with Scott Humphrey, we would go skiing anytime we could. And Randy's an awesome skier, and he lives up in Vancouver. So there's a couple times we went to Whistler where Scott would go up to Whistler and we would ski with Randy a little bit. I mean, we never really dug into like technical stuff, but it was just kind of cool. I'm like, same thing. I'm literally on a chairlift, much like this.
Again, that's pesky snowboarder. Just won't get.
And I'm like sitting next to Randy Staub, and I wasn't geeking out or anything. Like I've only like really gotten starstruck with one person, but it was like really cool. I'm like sitting there. I'm like, fuck, this is fucking cool. Like I'm This guy's mixed some of my favorite albums and engineered some of my, like, the reason why I am doing this is in good part because of like the work that this guy's done. And I'm like, you know, on a chairlift and Whistler with the guy. It was pretty cool.
I'd say sometimes there's that vibe of not talking shop in some of those situations.
Oh, you know what?
Like,
I know it's so hard.
You want because you want to ask questions, but at the same time, it's like at the end of the day, it's people with jobs, and sometimes people don't want to talk shop all the time because it's like they've been thinking shop all the time, and now they're not. So it's.
And I'm a guy that literally, to a fault, like. Somebody like could be like, yeah, there's this guy, Chris, I know, blah, blah, blah. Here's his number. And then he gives it to his cousin and he gives it to his brother-in-law and he gives it to his friend. And that guy calls me and I will literally, if he baits me into a shop conversation, I'll be like 2.5 hours later, be like, fuck, I should probably go and make dinner. My kids have been waiting for me. Like I'm that guy. I don't think Randy's really that guy, but you know, talking about like meeting Mutt Lang, like he's a guy that I still like, I will. And I've mentioned a few people who I work with or I know that have worked with them. I'm like, if there's any scenario where you're like, oh, Mutt's in town, we're going for dinner. I don't give a fuck what the scenario is. I'm inviting myself and I will do whatever I have to do to get there. Like there's one of those guys that I definitely want to meet. It would be so hard for me to not talk shop with that guy. And I don't think he'd probably reciprocate.
Like, yeah, that was a good time. That was a good record.
Yeah, totally. So how did you do that? And be like, well, you know, we just, you know, put some mics up. And I'm like, fuck, come on,
a good performance. And,
totally. Yeah. I'm like,
No, it is tough. And it's tough to explain that to some people sometimes when they're just like, oh, you know, you meet people. And like, I wanted to ask, like you mentioned though, you've been starstruck. Like what kind of, you know, artist or producer, like who's that been?
Slash.
And
it was the weirdest thing because I'd been in LA for like 3 or 4 years and I'd met a lot of a lot of guys that I were like, holy shit. Like there's that moment of me where I'm like, holy shit. But I've never like with the exception of Slash. And I didn't even realize I was like, it was kind of freaking me out. Like I knew he was coming to the studio. He was collaborating on something. I can't remember what it was. He was coming over to do some co-writing or play a solo or something. And I knew he was coming. And I'm just doing my thing, getting prepared and like making sure everything's set up and, you know, no big deal. Like I was excited.
Act casual.
Yeah. And it's not even like, I'm not even telling myself like, settle down, not casual. Like that's just kind of, you know, the way it's been for, you know, subconsciously. And then like the buzzer or the assistant, you know, the buzzer at the gate goes off and the assistant's like, hello. And he's like, hey, it's Slash. And I'm like, I just started getting all fucking shaky. And like, I'm like, holy fuck. And I'm like, what is happening right now? I didn't even know how to process it. And then he came in and he's the coolest guy ever. And within 5 minutes, you're still like, holy shit. Like, but he's just like super nice. So you're like, okay, I'm not shaking anymore. This is good.
I'm a firm believer we don't get to choose how we feel. For good or bad, but it's just those moments where you're just like,
it was weird. It was like a mini panic attack. I'm like, what is happening right now?
But he's Slash's, that's the guy. Like he's living legend. It's like that's the guy.
And I think at that time, like he was everywhere. Like I think like you go pump gas and there's a picture of Slash, and like you turn on the TV and it's Slash, and like he was not saying that like I was a huge Guns N' Roses fan, and even as big of a Slash fan as I was Guns N' Roses. But yeah, he was just everywhere. And I just, it was odd. It was odd the way I felt. I mean, he wasn't odd. He was the nicest guy ever. And I think he'd come over a couple times after that. And the other times I was totally fine, but very weird.
No, again, there's times we listen to artists and we cross paths with them. And it's just like, whoa, like this is a real thing. Like that's the person. You mentioned Motley Crue is one of your favorite bands. Working with them, what capacity?
So I've actually only really worked on one song with the whole band. They did a single. James Michael produced it. Again, that was surreal because up until that point, I'd done a lot of work with Tommy. with his solo stuff and Methods of Mayhem, and having him play on other things. Like he would play on a lot of stuff that Scott was producing for other artists. Like he played on a lot of Rob Zombie stuff, and we'd have him come in and do things, on other bands that, didn't have a drummer, or the drummer wasn't there for some reason. And then I'd also actually, I didn't really do like too many music. I didn't do really any quote unquote music projects with Mick, but I got to know Mick a little bit, and he was thinking about building a studio, and I was kind of helping him start put that together. And then he likes to talk shop, so we would talk shop. And so I got to know him a little bit and kind of go hang out with him. But when we did that single, like Nikki was there. I didn't know Nikki very well. And Vince just came in for the day to do the vocals. There was one point where they were all there, and that was, again, not starstruck, but I was like, fuck, this is cool. Like the whole band is here. Cause I think like I said, I've been working with Tommy for probably like 7 or 8 years. So like there was a huge comfort factor there. I helped them build a studio. We were in that studio that I helped build for Tommy, and I'm like, fuck, the band's here. It was pretty cool. But I've done a lot of more music projects with Tommy than the rest of the guys or the band as a whole.
Well, just hearing I guess again, the word starstruck, but using the word surreal. Yeah. I think that's the better term for it, because you probably think back, like if you were to tell 15-year-old self,
no fucking way,
just stay with this, and eventually you'll be in Tommy Lee's studio, or in with the entire band. Just hold the line, and you'll get there, sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think that like to use that as a lesson, I think even and I still I think some people, maybe look at where I'm at and we're been like, holy shit, you made it. And it's kind of like, I kind of still feel like I haven't quite made it, and I'm still kind of trying to make it, I guess, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but I think the lesson from that is, even at this point where I'm at, hold the line. And if, I don't know, am I 38 or 39? Can't remember. I'm 38 or 39. But if you tell, it would be cool to be able, when I'm 45, have something where I could be like, if you told 38-year-old Chris that this was, if he just held the line, that he would be here, like that's still important, right? So I think that's kind of the lesson that I don't learn from enough, and I should probably think about more often, is like, there's still time. Like there's a lot of time, and there's a lot of opportunity left. And sometimes you get a little jaded, or maybe a little just burnt out. And I have definitely been burnt out making records, to the point where like I didn't want to do it anymore, and then got pulled back in, thankfully. But like thinking about that, being like, yeah, you know what? Tell 15-year-old Chris that he was going to be in a studio with the entire band of Motley Crue. And this is after like they had broken up 5 times before that, right? So that in itself was a miracle.
The third farewell tour.
Totally. And I think I need to learn from that, be like, okay, listen, like there's going to be, hopefully, if you keep going, there's going to be a 45-year-old Chris or a 50-year-old Chris looking back being like, man, I wouldn't have thought when I was 38 or 39 that was going to be the case. And hopefully it happens, and keep working towards it.
You mentioned burnout on a record, and I think
career burnout, not just a record.
Just burnout in general, because like some people don't know how much work goes in on the production side.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that cause burnout on some of these projects, or just you say career burnout? Like what are some of the causes of it?
So the reason why I'm even still doing this today is because I figured out what for me was the burnout, and it comes down to the people I'm working with, bar none. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts, no exceptions. We could literally be making, nature soundtracks at the Babbling Brook. And if I'm doing it with people that I genuinely like and genuinely respect, and they respect me and I like to work with, I'm a happy camper. if I'm making hit records with a bunch of fucking assholes who treat me like shit, or, you know, if it's a producer, treat the artist like shit or create a bad environment, I'd rather, you know, go shovel driveways.
So it's just the chemistry vibe. You're just like,
it's all about people for me now. And when I burnt out and I took a break from making records, I got, actually, that's kind of the beginning. Chad Kruger was kind of the guy who pulled me back in. And that was like, holy shit, like, this doesn't have to be the way that it was. You can work with awesome people, and yeah, you always strive to make amazing records. That's what we're trying to do, but it's not the measuring stick for, it wasn't the measuring stick for me anymore that made it worthwhile. And I could make a record with a group of people who I just genuinely loved, and yeah, I would love the world to hear it, but if they don't, I'm okay with it. Whereas the flip side of that, I'm not okay with. I would give up 52 weeks at #1 on Billboard working with an asshole for obscurity, working with people I love.
Yeah, no, life, not, this is going to sound pretty dark, but life can be pretty short, you know, unexpectedly sort of thing. And the idea of spending with people that you're saying that respect each other and want to make the best of it and want to treat each other, you know, have a good, positive environment. So like a lot of bands and artists, I've seen it on the production side too, where you're just like, this is toxic. Yeah. Like, and it's one of those things where I always thought, if I wake up and really, really, really don't want to go to work, there's an issue. It's one thing to know that work's going to be difficult, or you need to overcome something that is outside of your comfort zone. Yep. But when you're every alarm's going off and going, this is toxic. Why are people doing this sort of thing? It's like, I don't want to be in that room either.
It's hard to recognize. And it's also, I mean, fuck, I lived in Hollywood for a long time. Like it's, you see how it happens, man. Like you start making, again, not to get too deep or kind of, I don't want to even say dark. Like this is just kind of like, and it's not like mutually exclusive, right? Just because you're making #1 records doesn't mean everybody's an asshole. Like that's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is, you start making these like deals with yourself, or you start like rationalizing or justifying. For instance, if you're working with a group of people, but you're doing the style of music, or you're doing it with a band, or you know, a musician that you just love and whatever, you justify that all the shit that's going on is worth it because it's giving you an opportunity. And you know, unfortunately, in a lot of businesses, entertainment may be just being on the forefront because it's so, you know, visual to a lot of people, and it's so covered by media. You know, we're kind of, you know, indoctrinated with the whole, like, you got to put up with shit sandwiches, and or you got to pay your dues, and you got to be willing to sacrifice and do all the shit in order to have the success, the, you know, commercial success. And it's not the case. It doesn't have to be. But for whatever reason, that's the story we're told. And that's the myth that keeps on getting perpetuated by a lot of pieces of shit doing really well because they're very talented, not because they're pieces of shit. But what happens is, producer, let's say a producer. You get a producer who's a piece of shit, and he's got 10 guys working for him, and he gets a bunch of #1s and is working with the best artists and doing all the best gigs. And those 10 guys underneath him, they know he's talented, but so are 100 other guys. They somehow connect the dots that, well, I must have to be, if I want to be like him, I got to be a piece of shit too, right? And then it perpetuates itself. And it's like, no. He was successful in spite of being a piece of shit. Sorry for keep on saying piece of shit. Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
And again, I'm not singling anything out. This happens across the board. I've got friends who are in the finance world. I've got friends who are in the real estate world. I've got friends who are, you know, this happens everywhere. In the business world, everywhere. Like, you know, you you start saying, okay, well, what am I willing to do in order to get a number one? Or what am I willing to do to get that project or to get that paycheck or to get the whatever? And that burnt, I'm not saying I was doing that consciously, but I got burnt out. And then I kind of realized that, and not that I was working with piece of shits all the time. I was actually working with a lot of really great people. But it was the ones that were toxic that I didn't really understand. And I was willing to deal with the shit sandwich for the fruits of it, for lack of a better term, and then I drew a line in the sand and I was like, nope, not going to do that anymore. So
no, I've learned dealing with some people like that they were perhaps just taught wrong. They were taught by somebody that this is how you need to act in order to be successful. As you're saying, be successful, or to claim top of the pecking order, or demand respect when you're in the room and stuff like that. I've seen just as many, if not more, people that are nice to people and make sure that they're fed or had a way to get home from the studio. And we're talking about you, Jeff. But just make sure everyone's okay, and then take care of everybody. It's like, you don't have to just constantly be, just hitting everyone over the head with, you are more important with them. You're smart. They're dumb. It's like, it doesn't make for a strong team. As soon as you get wise to that, as soon as you're just like, wait a second, like, I don't need to be here. And I think too, it's like, once you accept, if I'm not here, they would just get somebody else. So why wouldn't I just want to be in a room where people do appreciate each other?
Yeah.
Again, life can be really short. So
life can be. And you know what? There had been gigs that I took and I'm like, I don't like these people. I know this is not going to be good. I'm going to have to put up with, an environment that I'm not going to like pre-burnout. And I took it based off the opportunity. And sometimes it paid off. Sometimes for me, if I'm aware of it, it's easier to do. I don't like doing it. And I like I said, I drew the line in the sand. I don't do it anymore. I don't, it's not worth it to me anymore, at any cost really. But, I would weigh that the cost benefit analysis and be like, I'm going to get just shit on for the next, 3 months and not appreciated and worked to the bone and blamed when shit that's not my fault doesn't work out. And you know what, but I'm willing to do it because, there's a relationship here I want to foster with somebody who is good. And I think there's, that's worth it. And sometimes it's worked. Sometimes it's, been a bad experience. I think everybody's got to make that decision on their own. But at this point in time, nope, no more.
To somebody coming up, again, we're living in the post-COVID world. Yeah. But someone coming up, 21 years old, they're getting into the studios, they're working under somebody, and it is a toxic environment, but they feel obligated to stay there because it's an opportunity. What would you tell them?
Again, that's kind of where the cost benefit analysis comes in, because I think that's different for everybody. Everybody's got a different threshold. When I worked at the chop shop in LA, when I first went down to LA, we had a lot of assistants. We would go through assistants sometimes weekly. And so I was training a lot of assistants. And no, it was a shitty scenario. But it was interesting because I learned a lot from that. And I was young. I went down to LA when I was 20. And we would get a batch of assistants in fresh out of recording college that were 24, 25, 26-year-old guys. And I'm sitting here interviewing them. This is fucking weird. And I know it was, and some of them even said, this does not work for me. I'm not going to have a 20-year-old kid tell me what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to work. Right. But it was a weird situation. But it taught me a lot about, different people are motivated differently. Not everybody's like me or, the people that I have close relationships with that I know kind of what motivates them. Some people, if you lean on them hard, they crumble. And other people don't do anything until you lean on them hard. And you got to be able to recognize that and if you can't recognize that, they're going to interpret that very differently. So like, if you can't recognize that, you know, when you're leaning on a guy who doesn't get motivated that way and is not liking it, or is not really, the effect is not like, yeah, motivating you and you're doing your job and you're learning and blah, blah, blah. You're just crumbling that guy. If you don't change that, then you're not going to get, like, it's not going to be good for anybody. So I guess, you know, again, what would the lesson of that guy be? If you can take it and you understand what's happening and you take it for face value and there's a benefit at the end of it, maybe for some people it's worth doing. If you're not that person who can take that type of, you know, interaction, or I don't even know what you'd call it, then it's going to be a lot more important that you find the right personality to hook up with. You know, like, there's a lot of guys, and you know, the other thing is, like, when I came up, I was kind of the last, I think the last generation of, like, you know, the very, like, distinct studio hierarchy, right? Like, I found like anybody the next generation younger than me didn't really come up. They're like, oh yeah, I was a runner, and then I was an assistant, and then the assistant got sick, or the engineer got sick one day, and then I ended up tracking and doing some overdubs, and then, you know, the mixer, and then I did like a rough mix at the end of the night, and the producer really loved it, or the band really loved it, and then I ended up mixing it. Like, I haven't really heard of that, of anybody, you know, much younger than me. Like, the guys younger than me were, you know, it was a different path for the most part. So I think now it's less about like, oh yeah, I've got to gut this out and just, you know, take the hard knocks in order to climb the ladder. There is no ladder anymore. So, you know, I think you kind of have to just weigh it and be like, okay, can I go do this on my own? What are the other opportunities? You know, am I better off just going and learning by myself? Am I better off going and finding a person whose personality fits better, because now there are more of them out there and there's less of a limited opportunity, you know, with that one studio in my town, right? That studio probably closed 15 years ago. So, you know, I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a tough, very, very personal.
Yeah, no, not to throw that question at you. I was just curious, but also you made me think about it, like getting the question right now, like people wanting to get into studios, like get started in recording and stuff. And I'm like, I just don't think studios are taking people as assistants and runners anymore, because there's still schools flooding the market with fresh graduates. And I'm like, they'll probably get some hate for saying this, but like, they'll probably use you for, you know, 3, 4, 6 months and then send you back on the streets and get somebody else. Yeah. You know, it's just like that unfortunately that makes sense with the business model, to keep costs low. But it's like, if you can find yourself where you can work with somebody or work online with somebody, or even, again, YouTube, great resource to listen to what people are up to and learn some mix stuff, learn some production stuff, listen to, you know, people chat about, you know, their experiences. Like, there's lots of other ways to be a fly on the wall and learn these days.
Totally. And I'd even say that now there's really no kind of status quo for, you know, production techniques, or like, you know, limited resources in terms of facilities or equipment. Like, there's all these things. And I mean, we could have a whole 5-hour conversation on why I think there's probably some downsides to the fact that, you know, everybody and their mom's got GarageBand and has got a recording studio on their computer. There's a lot of great stuff too. And I think that's probably for the people who are really looking to do it and get started in it and want to do it for a career or just do it as a passion. I mean, it's pretty amazing to be able to have all of that. And yeah, you can learn so much, but like, even with the fact that, like you were saying at the beginning, like, you can like Cannibal Corpse and want to go listen to Taylor Swift. Well, the same thing kind of happens with music production. Like, I feel, you know, yeah, there's always going to be, you know, the active rock band that needs to sound a certain way to get on the radio because they're a major label and they need to do this and that and this and that. But I mean, like, if you're a rock band, you know, there's really no reason why you have to sound a certain way. So, you know, you don't really need to go and be like, okay, well, how do I mic up a drum kit? Like, just, you can just experiment now. Like, and honestly, you can make it sound whatever way you want, because there's probably an audience out there for some weird esoteric drum sound that is probably not on my radar, but there might be, you know, a good amount of people who that's right up their alley. You know, like there's a term in kind of like in you know the entrepreneur world called, you know, I just spaced on it. The smallest viable audience. And you're like, the smallest viable audience can support your business. You don't have to have 1 billion people listening to your band. You can have, you know, if you're an independent artist like me or you or another guy, and you just really constantly release music or beats or write music and singer-songwriter stuff, you can have 1,000 fans. And I think you said this on your other show last week or whatever. Like, you can have 1,000 fans who are investing a small amount of money, or 10,000, and be fine. Right? I know, you know, like you totally know that concept.
I
right?
say 1,000 fans, $100 a year.
Perfect.
Invested. That's easy math for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you don't have to go pay, you know, $1,000 a day for a studio and hire a guy, you know, an engineer and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. Like you can do this very cost effectively to where you don't have to get crazy with it. So if you want to pan the snare drum left and the bass drum right, fucking go for it. Like, you don't need to go to school to learn. Like, I think that's the thing. I mean, here's the thing. I've been very anti-recording school for a long time, pretty much since I went to recording school, because my experience was shit. My recording school was terrible. It was called Recording Arts of Canada. And at the time they were in Stony Creek, and I think they might be in Toronto now. And if anybody's watching works there, I don't mean to be like shitting on it, but my experience wasn't good. I came out of there not feeling like I didn't know anything. And I probably knew more than I actually gave myself credit for, but I did not come out of there. And maybe, you know what? Speaking of training assistants, the ones who never had a chance were the ones who came into the studio thinking they knew something. So maybe it was a blessing that I didn't think I didn't know anything. So maybe they were the best recording school on the planet because I came out thinking I knew nothing. There's a little bit of a paradigm shift that kind of occurred to me. But I've been a little anti-recording school because I feel like the recording schools need their business, and I don't know a lot of people who are going to pay $20,000 a year to go to school and, you know, to learn how to, you know, check lunch orders and make coffee and, like, literally the most important class that a recording school could teach should be called Fly on the Wall. And once a week for the entire day, they should take the students and literally sit them in the corner and be like, the first person who talks fails. Like, for me, like, that was my experience, where it was like, hey, you go sit over there and be quiet. Like, now, not all the time, but there were a lot of people where that was, you know, that was the difference between whether you got invited to come back tomorrow is whether or not you, like, didn't shut up and didn't make yourself not invisible, but kind of, you know, not prominent. And that's been the difference. I'll tell you, like, man, there's been a lot of guys who, like, when I was at the chop shop, like 2 days in, 2 hours in, you know, they went to some fancy school in Phoenix for $50,000 a year and, you know, top of the class. And, like, you're like, okay, thank you very much. Here's your Southwest plane ticket back to Phoenix. Like, you know, see you later.
No, it's they don't talk about that stuff, because even the school that I went to,
it's not sexy. How do you sell that?
Yeah, it was very technical. I actually went to school for TV and film, but it's like the idea of getting into studios, like, and you know, being assistant to Jeff Lazille, it's like I was quiet the whole time because you're just absorbing. You're just listening.
Well, and Jeff will hit you. He'll hit you.
He never. But the thing is, it's like I learned really quick. It's just like there is a pecking order to what's going on with you know, the dynamics between producers and artists and stuff like that. And it's like don't get involved. Like, just be there for help. You know, if you're an assistant. But it's like,
and another class could be, you know, once you graduate from Fly on the Wall, if you make it through Fly on the Wall, you know, week at recording school, Chris Baseford's not sexy recording school that nobody would ever sign up for. Yeah, if you make it through the first week of Fly on the Wall, the second week will be recognizing, like it should be called fishing, and we drop little pieces of bait and see who picks up on them. Like hey, what'd you think about that guitar part the guitar player just played? And let's see what you do. Okay, and then, so week 2 is fishing. And who's gonna bite the bait? And if you bite the bait, you better make sure you know whether or not, like, the guy who pulls you out is gonna throw you back, or is he gonna eat you?
Yeah. No, it was funny because you brought up a memory of being in the studio with Jeff and a band, a guitar player in particular, and Jeff and the guitar player were kind of butting heads on something, and he turns to me and says, the guitar player goes, "What do you think?" And I'm just like, this is not cool at all. So I think I just walk the line. I'm just like, I think that, like, I like this part, I like that part. I think they both work. I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and when I get back, hopefully this is sorted.
So I have been in that position, and some of the times I've handled it okay, and other times I've, like, stayed up the whole entire night replaying it in my mind. But there's a sick part of me when I see that happen in the studio. Now I never do that. I'll never throw somebody under the bus. But there's a sick part of me when that happens, and the assistant, and I'm not the one asking him, but the artist might. Even if I'm in, like, a heated conversation with the guitar player, if the guitar player puts the assistant on the spot, there's a sick part of me that I'm, like, inside just loving every ounce of the squirm. And then there's the compassionate side of me, and then before he says anything, I'll be like, I'll interject. But I like watching the squirm, and it makes me feel like I'm in that guy's position again. It's like, I'm young again. I can feel that weird squirminess. Like, holy shit, what do I say?
Yeah, it's a thing, and it's funny you mentioned, with assistants, and I've invited people to sessions that I think, they'd be good assistants, or at least give them some access to stuff.
Yeah.
And then it breaks my heart when they start chiming in on things.
Oh.
And I'm like, you're here as a guest. And, like, you're a guest, and I hate rhyming. You're a guest, and this is a bit of a test, and you're failing the test right now. And we're gonna have a conversation after about this, because
that's an ugly vest.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, for people that are invited to recording situations, or, again, friends, don't chime in if you're not part of that relationship. Don't chime in on it, because it can throw things way off balance.
So there's somebody that I work with, and they like to do what's called show and tell sessions. And if anybody has been to one of these show and tell sessions, you'll know who I'm talking about. And it will be everything from final mixes to going way back, where it's like, hey, come and check out this guitar riff we wrote earlier in the day. And it will be maybe like midnight, and there'll be, a bottle of wine and, some drinks going. And there might be like 8 people in the room who have absolutely zero to do with any of this. And me having come up through the hierarchy of, keeping my mouth shut, even when I feel like I've got a valid opinion that's backed up by something, sometimes these like show and tell sessions drive me fucking nuts for that exact reason. And I don't invite these people. Like, these people are not my people that I'm like, oh shit. Like, you bring that guy to the dinner table, and all of a sudden he starts like no. Who invited this guy? Like, they're never my people, because I'm like, I know better. But like, but it's, it's the artist, so he brings them, and that's his right. But the whole time I'm just like, I fucking hate this. I don't, and there'll be like people. But you know what? It's amazing sometimes getting the layman's feedback, or yeah, you know what? If, like, that girl who doesn't even listen to this, and I'm not saying girl, like, if that person who doesn't even listen to this kind of music is like, I don't like the sound, kind of sounds kind of funny and crunchy. It's like weird. I don't know. I don't like it. You're like, who the fuck? That's the best guitar sound I've ever heard. Who the fuck is that? But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, oh shit.
That's perspective.
Well, if she doesn't like it, when, like, her boyfriend's playing it, is she gonna be like, turn this shit off? Or is she gonna be like, I like this song, keep it going? Like, right? And I think sometimes being open to that, even though I hate it, being open to it can actually be the difference between something sometimes. Now, there are times when you're just like, shut up. No, we've gone around the wagon on this, and what we did is right. But there's other times you're like, oh shit, is that the wrong guitar sound? Like, should we not do that? Like, did we do this big fuzzed out thing that now is turning half the people in the room off?
Yeah, seeds of doubt can do that. My thing sometimes with that is like, if they're wrong, they have no skin in the game. It was an opinion, we asked for it, they gave it. Yeah. But like, if I'm wrong, then I'll own it.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was good. Just like when you hear something and you again, Sonics especially, it's like when you think it's good, you have to put your full weight behind it. And one of the lines I picked up, actually I think it was off Pensado's Play. Someone said it, but it was, God forbid you become known for something that doesn't come natural to you. And the idea of like, if you don't trust how you got there in the process,
how do you do it?
And something takes off, and you're like, that's amazing. Like, let's do it again. You're like, I don't know.
I don't know. Throw some more darts. Hope I hit something.
We get our friends, neighbors, uncle and aunt in here to sign off on this mix, because I don't know what we did.
I have no idea. Well, that's a very interesting like take on. I think you could apply that to music production in general, because a lot of these, again, talking about like just the access to equipment, plugins, software's cheap, like all this stuff. So many people are looking for the kind of the one detail of like, well, how do you set your EQ? And they don't understand that it's kind of like, yeah, you know what? You might be able to do one mix that sounds really good because those presets from all the plugins that you picked, you figured out how to make the soup work. But if you don't know why, it's going to be very difficult for you to do that time and time again. And that's an absolutely like spot on point. Like it's one thing having success with something that you're like, oh, awesome, we had success. But it's like, if you stumbled upon it, or if you just were throwing mud at the wall and hoping something stuck, or like you said, had 10 people and you took the committee. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, that's a tough situation. But that's how people make music a lot of these days, is they just, they pull up the software and they hit some presets and hope shit sticks. And if it doesn't, they keep clicking the preset button until it's another one.
Make it better. Fix my snare.
Click, 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 click. That one sounds good. Cool. Move on to the next track and hope it all works at the end. So.
I want to go back again to your path here.
Yeah.
So you're 15. You've got golden ears. You're an audiophile. You got a hi-fi stereo system.
I don't know about that.
Okay, well, fast forward there. You've gone through school. You ended up with Lenny at Sony.
Yep.
Did Lenny ship you out to Vancouver?
No, Lenny shipped me out to LA.
So you went out to LA that way. Yep. Going from Toronto to LA, like how was that decision? Was it easy? Was it like,
I don't even think I had a decision.
You're just like, the bag was packed and you're just like, just go to the airport, figure it out.
I've told this story a couple times. And so my mom's American and I've always had American citizenship.
Okay. That was the other question.
Big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
I had American citizenship since I was a kid, even though I was born in Canada, grew up in Canada. And while I was at Sony, and like the talent in the building at Sony was like top notch, like all the production guys, the writers, Lenny, like everybody was like top notch. Even having gone down to LA and experienced LA, and then reflecting back, like at Sony, I didn't know any different, right? I'm like, oh, this is my first thing. Like, when I met the people there and I was working with them, and I was so overwhelmed, like. Sometimes you're not even taking stuff in. You're just kind of like trying to hold on and not get kicked out of the session or be able to come back the next day. So I wasn't really taking it all in, but going to LA, experiencing all that, and then reflecting on it, I realized like how top notch that whole thing was. Any single person in that building could have been an A-list person or, in the production business in LA. And it was kind of like, as I found out through just talking or whatever, it was like going to work in the States, the immigration was tough. And like the minute that anybody heard, they're like, oh, he's got American citizenship, they're like, oh fuck, you're gone. Like the minute you get an opportunity, you have to go. So even though the opportunity was never there, like I remember I probably had conversations with Jeff, probably had conversations with Lenny. You know, there's a couple other guys, you know, that I did a lot of work with there that I met through at Sony or worked at Sony that were like, yeah, you know, you'll end up, you have to at some point, if you have that option, go. And, but I never, like, I figured I'll be like, oh, well, like 10 years from now, you know, not like next week kind of thing. And I literally, I was in one of the like writers' rooms wrapping cables one morning. It was like 9 a.m. And Lenny came in and was like, hey, I talked to Scott, and he would just say Scott. I knew he was talking about Scott Humphrey because, you know, I was a fan of Scott's and I knew that they worked together and they were still friends and everything. Be like, oh, I just talked to Scott. He needs a guy in he needs a guy in LA. And I told him you do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah. And I think it was like a Tuesday morning. And he's like, yeah. He needs you there Friday. I'm like, this Friday? He's like, yeah. So I think I remember like going to the mall to buy like a big enough suitcase that I don't know what's happening. Like, am I going down there for a week? Am I going down there for a month? Am I going down there forever? And I remember like it happened so fast. And I remember like going, like thinking, I'm like, oh, well, I'll be back. And a lot of people were like, no, you won't. No, you won't. Because a lot of the time the people had to come back because of the immigration. It's not that they weren't kicking ass. They just, that's a big piece of the puzzle. And that for me was never a concern. And I didn't come back. So I went down to LA. I think I talked to Scott the next day and he was like, yeah, book a plane ticket, come down. I'll pick you up at the airport, you know, whatever. And man, that was a whirlwind. I think I got to LA on a Friday. We started a session on Monday. He had a console that I'd never even heard of before. It was a Euphonic CS3000, which if anybody's worked on that thing, it's the most backwards fucking console you've like it. So if you've been
guessing digital console,
it's analog but digitally controlled. So it had towers of like, picture it when you pull like a SSL strip out and all the circuitry, all that shit was mounted in racks in the machine room. And then the board was like a digital controller. The knobs would send messages to the analog circuitry. Yeah. Okay. And then, so it was instantly recallable, but it was all analog audio paths. Brilliant idea. And once you knew how to use it, it was actually it was actually really good. But, you could take a guy who's been working in studios for 10 years or 20 years and sit them in front of it, and without any explanation, they would be lost. I didn't even feel like I knew how to use the board at Sony properly. Like I was like, I don't know what that button does. I mean, I think I know what the button does, but and the other thing was he was for some reason, he was replacing the carpets in the studio. So the board wasn't even there when I arrived. So I had to wait till Sunday night till the carpets were back in and put back in order to actually be like, okay, now I got to go figure out how this fucking board works for the session that starts on Monday. And it was for a band that at the time was like Republic's like priority rock act of that like half year. It was like a brand new band and they, blah, blah, blah. But I was so excited because like at Sony, rock music wasn't quite back. It was, I mean, that was probably it was 2003. So rock music was kind of starting to come back and, kind of the modern kind of rock stuff. But like at Sony, there wasn't a lot of rock that we were doing. And I was a rock guy. So now I'm going down to LA to work with Scott Humphrey, who's a rock guy. And the first band is like this like metal band from Texas. And these guys were like just legit. Like it was awesome. I was really excited. I had a blast, but I was shitting myself because I'm like, fuck, I don't know. It was intimidating, and it was like there was zero comfort level on anything, and I'm surprised. Like I remember bits and pieces of it, but a lot of it is a little bit is a blur because it was very overwhelming.
Just get
through it. And it was, and then, like I said earlier, it was on that session, Tommy Lee just happens to drop by the studio and say, hey, and then he's like singing background vocals on one of the songs. I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? And then the project right after that was, we did 2 or 3 new songs for a Rob Zombie, like greatest hits album. And I was a huge Rob Zombie and White Zombie fan. So I'm like, fucking Rob Zombie. I'm like, fuck. So it was after those 2 projects. And again, I kind of didn't ask questions. I kind of just went, and it was after those 2 projects, like we worked like every day. I think we had like 3 days off that entire time. And it was after those 2 projects. So it was probably maybe 3 months. We had like a little bit of a break before like the next thing started. And I remember like having a conversation with Scott being like, so like, what do I do? Like, are we done? Do I go
back to the airport?
And he's like, is this working for you? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, it's working for me. Like, let's, just keep going. And I'm like, okay, I guess I live here now. And I had an apartment in LA with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And I called her and I'm like, I'm staying. I'll come. And I, came back to LA and for a week and moved her back in with her parents. And then, luckily we were kind of able to do the long distance thing and kind of hang on by the seat of our pants on that whole, adventure. And she ended up coming down to LA, and, that part is history. But, it was very weird. Like I'm going to LA, and I just didn't ask questions. I just kind of went. I'm like, fuck it. I don't know. Like, just go with it. It was very weird.
No, it's an awesome story though, because like it's not uncommon, but at the same time, there's a lot of times in careers where you can probably place it to a phone call, an email, letter, a chance meeting, and it's like Lenny could have came in on Tuesday and said like, hey, Scott needs somebody for Friday, and you could have said no. You know what I mean?
You know what I've thought back a lot about,
and it might. Like a lot of things might have been very, very, very different.
Well, here's the thing that I think about a lot. And I owe a lot to a lot of my career to Lenny for a variety of reasons. But the thing that I've often thought about whenever I tell this story, or whenever I kind of, speaking around this kind of point, was Lenny had a very like particular way that he liked to work. And I remember even when I met Lenny for the first time, I knew one of the people at Sony that was like, oh, I'll introduce you to Lenny. And Lenny's like, yeah, you can come in and we're just going to meet. And I remember Lenny's like, well, I don't need an assistant. He didn't have an assistant. He's like, I don't need an assistant. It's a small studio. It was cool. You came in and like, hung out, blah, 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 blah. And it ended up progressing to me just kind of keeping on come again. I didn't ask questions. It was like, you want to come back tomorrow? I'm like, sure. And I came back again the next day, just not really knowing, but it turned into something. So I knew that being Lenny's assistant, and this isn't a dig on Lenny at all, but like, that wasn't an easy spot for him to kind of just, he couldn't just have anybody come and assist him. Like he wanted a very specific personality and a very specific kind of thing. And the way that we, at least from my point of view, it worked really well. Like I think he was happy and I was happy and whatever. He could have easily, when Scott calls him and says, hey, do you know of anybody? He could be like, no, I'll let you know if I hear of anybody. Because Lenny's fuck, I got a good situation. Chris is working out. I haven't had an assistant in a long time that actually like this works. He could have just been like, yeah, I'll keep my ear peeled, but I don't know anybody. Instead, he's like, yeah, I got the perfect guy for you. Like, how fucking awesome is that?
I think that's a sign of a great mentor. They want to see people grow.
Yeah.
Because what good is it if you just keep someone under your thumb the whole time?
But I see that all the time.
I see it too, and I don't think it's great. I don't think, unfortunately, people see it. They're in.
My heart breaks because I've actually been in the studio. Like, I mean, when you're in the studio, you're privy to a lot of conversations, and it's, code of the road. You don't say anything, you don't share, you don't do anything. But I've been privy to, like, closed door conversations of like, hey, that dude you got is fucking awesome. He's like, yeah, I know. So-and-so, so-and-so hit that guy's favorite artist called me the other day and wanted him to come do a session. And I told him no. I'm like, fuck. And I want to go find that kid and be like, insert fucking whoever hero. Dr. Dre fucking called your buddy and was like, hey, I want you to come work for me. It wasn't Dr. Dre, but you know what I mean? But, fucking just quit. Go find fucking Dr. Dre, But
find him right now.
Yeah, find him right now. But you know what I mean? Like, I've been where it's a strategic no. He's mine. I'm not letting him go. Even if it's his dream gig, even if it's the opportunity of a lifetime. And when Lenny was like, Scott needs you in LA, you got to go. And I'm like, okay, cool. I recognize how awesome that was at that time, but it was at all those other times when I was hearing people, clamp down on their, whether it be like, a ghost writer who was like, a programmer, an engineer who was actually a fucking top-notch producer, an assistant who was actually an amazing mixer, and they were being just held by whoever they worked for, and opportunities were being squashed without them even knowing. Every time I was privy to that, I was like even more thankful for the fact that, like, wow, like it was just every time it's the first thing I thought of. I'm just like, fuck, that was huge. So yeah.
No, just, I think it kind of goes back, just being surrounded by people, like good people that you trust. And again, looking out for your best interests as well, as a person, and understanding what some of your goals are and like things that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Because again, you could have gone to LA for 3 months and go, you know what, this really isn't for me. And you could have come back to Toronto and been like, I'm glad I got to do that still.
Oh, it probably wasn't for me. And I was like, fuck it. You gotta keep going.
You're there now.
That was one of those things. You're talking about that 21-year-old kid who's like, what do you tell him? Not that was bad, but like it was all good. It was all good, but it was like, it was scary. And I think if there was like if there was opportunities to back out, I might have, like, I don't know. It's tough to say. There was never an opportunity of like, okay, go home and I'll call you again. And then when he calls me again, I'm like, yeah, I'm good here. I like it here. Like, that never happened. It was kind of like, no, I'm here. And then 5 years go by and I'm like, well, been in LA for 5 years. How did that happen? So
it's funny. Short story with Jeff. Mike Turner? Yeah. So Mike Turner opened the Pocket Studios here in Toronto. And I remember Jeff saying that Turner needs somebody. So like, that's where I kind of got my start, is that just, right into the fire.
Yeah.
Working in that studio and with bands and stuff. I want to go backtrack for a second, because the school I do teach at, we've got a euphonic system 5. And I tell them, just like with analog consoles, anyone that's listening, analog consoles, what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
Just follow. But with digital consoles, it's like you have to know how they think.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it can take a minute to wrap your head around that. So
totally.
I can only imagine what you're describing there, the way that console was, or it's like the manual probably feels like a phone book, and
yeah,
you just have to get into it.
I mean, without getting technical, the patch bay didn't go this way. The patch way went this way. And when I say this way, so like if you have an output on a patch bay and it goes to the input, it didn't work like that. It worked in horizontal rows. And for each channel, there wasn't like there was like 4 inputs and 3 or 4 inputs and 6 outputs, or 6 inputs and 4 outputs. And they were all horizontally labeled. So like it made zero sense. And it was very tough to wrap your head around. Again, like you could take somebody who's worked on every single SSL, every single Neve, and every single API for 30 years, and you stick them in front of a Euphonic CS, and they're not going to know how to use it unless somebody's there walking them through it for a few days, and then they're like, okay, I get it, we're good. Or maybe not a few days, maybe a day or two. But I think I've been working I think I'd like literally only been at Sony for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. Like I still had no fucking clue like how to make a record. I mean, I didn't. I really didn't. And I was just like, fuck, I don't know, I guess, but
make it work.
I figured it out, made it work. And yeah, it was good times. I mean, man, when I think back, I don't think back enough, but like when I think back about it, I mean, like it was exciting. It was super exciting.
Just to put it in the universe for anyone who has anxiety over not knowing a console, you are not the first person.
Oh, fuck.
Get as much information as you can, and go in and figure it out. Because I think you do need to be in the fire to figure out a console works. So you can read as much as you want. To me, it's like you can read as much as you want about how to ride a horse. You got to get on the horse and figure it out. Because it's so, it's consoles. Because we don't have access to a lot of consoles these days.
And honestly, you kind of, it might be like, sacrilegious at this point, considering Mr. Neve just passed, rest in peace.
Yes.
But honestly, like you really don't need him anymore. I'm like, you can, and not saying that it has to all be digital. Again, not to be too techie, but like, I mean, I've been a control surface guy. I had the Avid Icon decontrol for a while, and I absolutely loved it. And there was a point when I was at the chop shop, we had an SSL 4K, which was awesome, and that's now at Tommy Lee's studio. And then I migrated off of that into in the box on the Icon, which was a huge wave for me to kind of transition into that. And I loved it. And there was a couple times when I first started mixing in the box, I'm like, fuck, I hate this. I just want to go mix on an SSL. And any chance somebody would hire me to do a mix and they had a budget, I'd go mix on an SSL. And there became like a crossover point when it was like, okay, cool, we got a budget. Where do you want to mix? I'm like, I'm good here. I'm good on my Icon. I'm good. They're like, well, we can go over to Henson and mix in the mix room on the SSL. No, I'm good. And I would rather mix on a control surface than mix on a board. And I mean, to this day, mixing on an SSL, as much as I love it and as much as I like, there's a lot of nostalgia and like, there's a lot of romanticizing about that. It's a chore. It really is a chore. Like the way you can fly, if you got a control surface that you really know inside and out, or even, some guys with a mouse. I mean, I just don't like a mouse for the obvious reasons.
Trackball?
We're trackball. Yeah, I like Josh on Instagram. He's like, ask him how he does a trackball with a so I broke my thumb playing hockey last year.
Okay, that's what that was all about.
Yeah. So and I use a trackball with 2 buttons. And I was like, and my whole hand was in a cast, but my pinky and my ring finger were free. I'm like, how the fuck am I gonna work? And I had to reprogram the mouse buttons, and I was I couldn't do anything with my thumb. So anyways.
I'm not laughing at the broken thumb. It's almost the thing. Like we need to have like a global poll between Team Trackball and Team Mouse.
Yeah,
because there's definitely a line in the sand. Because I travel.
Hang on,
I travel with my trackball.
Okay, so you have I don't want to say obscure, but in the audio world, that's an obscure trackball.
The PC Alley, which if I could buy more of them, I would. But
I use an obscure trackball as well within the audio community, and so I travel with them as well. And it got to a point where I would buy them in batches. I would buy 10 at a time, and I would just start leaving them at studio. So I literally have probably there's probably 20 Kensington Orbit trackballs, optical Orbit trackballs in studios from LA to Toronto to Vancouver to Nashville that have these trackballs probably rolled up in a drawer
just
somewhere.
tucked away somewhere.
Totally. And studios that I'm at often, I'll go to and I know where they are and I can pull them out. And then studios that I'm like, I always travel with one, but every once in a while the thing dies, or something happened, or I forget it at the hotel if I'm traveling. Like something happens and they'll be like, "Oh no, we got yours from last time. Is this yours?" And I'm like, "Yep, I know that's mine."
Is it there? Because on your Instagram, there's a picture with 4 Kensington trackballs. Is that it?
That's the one.
Okay, I have one of those too.
Okay, so that's I actually.
So if you come to Toronto, you need one. So let me know.
I actually switched to the newer one that's got a scroll wheel.
Oh.
And I avoided that one for a long time. But I think I switched to that one when I broke my thumb, because it was hard for me to hold the button and roll the ball at the same time to scroll. And so I'm like, fuck it, I got to get something with a scroll wheel. And that was the closest thing I could get to it. And then when I got my cast cut off and I retrained myself to use my thumb again, I was like, fuck, I like the scroll wheel. So I stuck with it. So then I had those four, like, just, I think they went in the garbage or something, because I was like, oh, don't need those anymore. So yeah, the gray and red one, those are scattered across North America.
They are tools though. And again, like, we're comfortable with it. And I see some people working and they can't work with the trackball. And it's like, I just feel really slow using a mouse trying to do certain things. But also I just feel like there's a lot of arm when you're using a mouse, and it's all just,
you can tell a lot about a person by the way, by what input device they use.
Well, just for anyone listening, that we're talking about trackballs and input devices now. But it's like, my thing is, the future is that, like, Captain Kirk chair, where just like you just have your controls. You don't you never see a mouse. You'd see like maybe a joystick or a trackball or something like that, or just it's all fingers. It's not, you're not moving your arm around.
Okay, so here,
anyways,
let's not derail too much, because this is super geeky. But I hate touchscreens, just for the record.
Really?
Hate them.
I'm surprised, because I was gonna go there with, like, Raven and stuff like that, or because, like, we're getting closer to, like.
Okay, so here's my phone.
All right.
Okay, I can't see the screen right now.
Yes.
Am I pressing the button? I don't know. Okay, there's a button on the side. There's 2 buttons on the side. I can't see them right now. I know which button I'm pressing right now. So with the touch screen, okay, then we can move on, because this is super geeky.
This is funny.
Not only do you have to look where you're touching, but you also then have to. So we've just determined that you need visual confirmation in order to get your finger in the right spot. And then once you have done that, then your finger is covering the visual cue. So you no longer have a visual cue. Now with some things it's fine. When you're just talking about numbers, you're like, okay, 4, when I put my finger on 4, I've made the visual thing, I've got number 4, I'm good. But when you're talking about knobs, when you're talking about sliders, when you're and you've got no tactile feedback, you have to look, and your finger is over top of whatever you're trying to do. I find it the most clumsy fucking thing on the planet. And maybe I'm a dinosaur. Maybe that's. But I'll take a keyboard with keys that I can tell where my fingers are. I'll take a control surface that's got buttons that I can just put my hand over, and I know what button I'm on top of. And when I press it, I know I pressed it. That's the other thing with touchscreens, is sometimes you press and you're like, did you press it or not? I don't know. Depending on what it does, right? You have to look at it.
No, these are all very valid points. And the thing is, it's funny, because when you mentioned not being able to see what you're doing, and this is going to be geek gamer stuff, but Nintendo DS, they had a little screen, and that's where the game was, and it was touchscreen. And the thing is that they had to give you a stylus to, like, do stuff on the screen.
Your finger wasn't in the way.
Because if your finger there's too much fing. So, like, it didn't really work. So
I got fat fingers, so it makes it even worse. It's like,
yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, I see people who like, and again, we talked about it earlier, the romantic element of recording, and there's people that like the idea of a console, but you can't really get a console into most home studios these days,
No.
especially with the budgets people have. So the idea were, okay, $5,000 and you can get this touch screen, and now you can feel like you're moving the faders around. It's to me, it's like, just get something with like motorized faders on it.
Totally.
Like,
and for me, it's the faders are great, but for me, it's almost more buttons and knobs.
Yeah.
And I've been bugging everybody in the business that I know to make control surfaces that are more about plug-in control than they are about mixing faders. And for some reason, that doesn't seem like every time this comes up, they look at me like I'm an alien, being like, really? We haven't heard that before. I'm like, oh, really? Like, how is that possible? But I mean, I've figured out a solution. I mean, I loved I loved the D-Control, and they discontinued it and they moved on to a new one, which I don't like as much. And that's why I didn't get it. I thought about getting a D-Control again, but I didn't want to be on like old technology. So I ended up getting like a smaller solution, and it's a compromise, but it's way better than a mouse. And for me, it's way better than a touchscreen. So there's tools out there, man. You can find tools, and you can like, and they shouldn't have to get in the way, but yeah, if you can figure out your tool set, and for me, like just being able to fly around is important. If things take too long, or if like are too many steps or are too clunky, it kind of takes the creativity, it takes the motivation and the fun out of it, and then I kind of just like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, workflow.
Huge. I've had conversations with people, and I've actually looked into like the actual like the psychology behind like workflow, and for like how workflow or how certain other outside stimulus affects your ears. And I've got theories on being able that your brain will interpret what your work is differently based off of like what you're doing, other things that have nothing to do with sound. And some of them are wacky theories, and some of them, when I've dug into it, I'm like, holy shit, there's a scientific study that proves that, like certain things. But yeah, I mean, for me, mixing in the box started sounding good when I had a knob to turn a plug-in with.
Interesting.
Figure that one out. Nothing changed. Like the plugin still sounded the same. Like being able to control everything with a knob or a fader or a button has zero to do with what's coming out of the speakers. And again, when you dig in on that, it's not that the plugin sounded different. It's what I was doing made the whole thing sound different, because I was enjoying what I was doing, and I was getting the feedback, and the workflow was stimulating to where it produced the results that I wanted. Going back to a band playing with or without an audience, are they going to sound the same? Nope.
It's funny you talk about just the input devices. Probably from.
Sorry if this is getting geeky.
This is fine, because like at the end there's nuggets in here I think people need to hear, but also just again the way your brain works, and you're probably familiar with it, like the Axe effects, and it's like the way I thought it sounded great, but it's how it wanted, like especially with the hardware, it's like how they wanted you to go in and manipulate the sounds and alter the sounds. I hated it so much. Yeah, because the way the interface was on it, and just having to go through the pages, and then I started using Line 6 Helix, like native, and the way it was
better workflow.
The way it was laid out for me, I'm like, this feels so much better, and the way just the way everything was in there, it felt like things sounded better quicker. Yeah, even though I thought the Axe sounded great, it's like Helix sounded great too, but it just was quicker great, if that makes sense.
And at the end of the day, which one's going to make you make better results with? And it's going to be the one that you enjoy working with as long as they're within the same ballpark. And I think that's the thing, is like with the technology now, and that's why as much as a gearhead as I am, I don't get super tweaky anymore. Like I'm less concerned about like, oh, which Neve model is it, or which revision 1176 is that? Like I don't care anymore. Like it's kind of, because they're all going to be within reason. And at the end of the day, it's going to be, which one do I enjoy the interface more, which one it gives me the options that I want. Like, there's some plugins that I like better than others that when you do an A/B and you're just listening at sonics, yeah, you know what? There's one, I use one that's probably a little inferior, but I like the way the interface looks. And I like that it has those 2 extra, filters that I don't have to pull up another plugin to get those filters. And that makes me do better work because I'm not thinking about that shit.
You can stay immersed in it. You can stay in your workflow and not need to be worrying about the tools doing what you need them to do. You can just get working. And
I would almost say with what's available now, and I've said this before in the past, like the Waves SSL channel, the interface, yes, it sounds like it sounds reminiscent of an SSL, 4000. But what really makes me comfortable with it is actually the way that it looks. And I've actually tested this, and it's true. For me, it might not be true for you, but it's true for me. You can line up another EQ to get a very similar curve, but I'll think the SSL sounds better every time simply because getting to that is more familiar. I like the interface. I like the look of it. It's, to me, because that's what I did the majority of my work on before digital, that to me is home. So, FabFilter is infinitely more powerful than an SSL 4000 or an SSL channel on Waves. And some people, for good reason, would say it's a superior plugin. But for me, nope. I'll do better sounding records every single time with the SSL channel than I will with a FabFilter plugin. It has nothing to do with the way it sounds, which is odd.
Again, workflow, familiarity. It's just, if it works.
Yeah. And not that it has nothing to do with the way it sounds. I mean, obviously, if I turn the knob on the E channel, it didn't sound right, I would be like, fuck this. I'd move on to something else. But you know what I mean? Like within reason.
Well, I think the other side of the coin, we poke fun at it, but when you see the Bomb Factory 76 show up, you're just, it's not that good.
It's hilarious. You know how many times? It's funny when I was doing a lot of like Guitar Hero and Rock Band mixes and stuff like that. Sometimes, depending on what era it would be, I would get files that were done on Pro Tools or were done on whatever, and it was amazing. Sometimes, like these big hit albums or big hit songs would show up, and like the lead vocal sound was like the shit that just gets like the plugins that just get shit on. and I would see it, and at first I'd be like, well, they had to be doing something else.
Something else here.
But they left it on, and it was intact, and it was like, it'd be like a Bomb Factory 76 and like, the EQ4 Avid plugin with like some fucked up curve. And then I would start matching the mix, and I'd get to the vocal, and I'm like, holy shit.
Second.
That's all it is. And it would be like, and then I'd be like, no, there's got to be more. And then I would put on other stuff. And I'd be like, well, this was mixed on an SSL by this guy, and he uses SSLs, and he uses, Blue Stripe 1176s. It must be that. I'll put the Blue Stripe on it, and I'll put an SSL. I'm like, nope, no. That doesn't sound the same. Take all that shit off, put the Bomb Factory 76 and the EQ7 or EQ4 back on it. It doesn't matter.
Whatever, exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Whatever, exactly.
It's all fun.
It's funny. Yeah, We're 2 hours and a bit into this. So
we're just starting, is what you're saying.
I'm just thinking, because it's like we could easily go another hour on some of these things, but there's certain things. I got a couple notes here, and I think this might be a good time to wrap this, because I will ask you to be back on here again, because there's still a few things I want to ask you about. I think we covered a lot there tonight, though. Where can everyone find you?
You can go to my website, chrisbaseford.com. I'm on Facebook, but not as much as I used to be. Probably the best place to find me is probably Instagram. And I think I'm just Chris Baseford on Instagram. That's
you got all your handles?
That's probably, I think that's all of them. But you know what? But yeah, that's probably Instagram comes directly to me because I think on my website, I think it goes to my manager. So yeah, Instagram's the best place to find me probably. Plus, then you get to see pictures of my dog and my kids and all the other stuff that people don't want to see.
Dog is Dozer.
Dozer. Those
That's such a good dog name.
He's a character. He's a cartoon character.
It's got a couple people here. Just before we go, a couple people here on YouTube. If you know who that is.
Hey Keith, how's it going, buddy? I'm skiing. There's sun shining and it's snow. I gotta keep them on.
And Josh Keeler.
Hey Josh.
And then the last thing here from Diesel.
Oh,
week
buddy.
3.
Week 3.
Learn how to take a punch. Back with
especially if you're working with Jeff, you got to be able to take a punch.
Jeff was an amazing mentor. Amazing working under him.
Me too. I mean, I have so many great memories, and even currently we have a lot of really great talks, and don't see each other enough, but hopefully that will change. But yeah.
Yeah, no, you had lots of kind words for Jeff, and I will say, like when I had him on a couple weeks ago, like there times I wanted to thank him for the amount of the advice, and just again those moments in your career when you're just like, this could have changed if someone didn't do something or didn't say something. So
yeah, 100%. Well, I'll take that as an opportunity to say thank you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Last question.
Yeah.
Last question before we go. M&Ms in pancakes, all the time, or definitely all the time?
Well, I got to do that.
Work.
Got to do that more, but I'm gonna put a caveat. Peanut butter M&Ms all the time for anything, even just handful. And I'll take that a step further, and I eat pancakes with peanut butter on them instead of syrup, or sometimes with syrup.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You could make like a sandwich, like a peanut butter pancake sandwich.
Pancake, peanut butter, pancake, syrup over the whole thing. I love it.
I think this sounds like how we could start off the next episode we're on together.
I love it. Thanks, Mike.
Chris, thank you so much. And producer, mixer, engineer, Chris Baseford today.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. To finish this off, and thank you to everyone that took part in the chat today. We'll be going through and answering some of the questions that were in there. Chris's details, if you're watching the replay on YouTube, how to get in touch with him are in the details below on YouTube. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like, subscribe, and comment. If you're watching on Twitch, remember to follow. And if you're watching on Facebook, just remember to share. Always appreciate that. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good night. See you later. I think that went pretty good.
It was awesome. Thanks, buddy.
I have so many questions for you still. Because again, flying the wall, but there's certain things with some of the sessions.
Dude, on the record, off the record, anytime you want to chat, you let me know. I mean, even if you got stuff that's burning now, I'm good.
I will let you know, but I've got you in writing now.
Love it.